So every choice is the end of something and the beginning of something else. It is much worse in life not making choices. People who live in limbo land, who kind of go neither way, are much more miserable. So I think we need to make the choices, but we need to recognize that they're never for free. You always lose something when you choose something else.
How you doing today?
I'm doing really well. Very nice to be speaking to you, Jesse. Very nice to meet you.
I've been looking forward to this chat. Nice to meet you as well. And I think it's important to set the scene going back to, a period of your time when you first got interested in the mind. So how did that all begin? How far back does that go?
I think most therapists, it goes back to their childhoods, doesn't it, really? So I think mine, I actually think mine starts in utero because I'm a twin. So I have a twin brother, Hugo, and I think everyone is wired to connect. But I think being born as a twin, where in the womb you suck each other's thumbs, your elbows and knees are pressed up into each other's faces, I think I'm super wired to connect. And so for as long as I can remember, I've always wanted to be close to people, and I've always wanted to know more what's going on inside them than what they're kind of wearing or what they're kind of looking like, what they're doing. Um, so I think that is the most sort of foundational part of being a therapist. The other part is that both my parents, who are both dead now, um, were very traumatically bereaved many times over before they got married, but they never talked about their parents or their siblings that had died. You know, my uncle had been
Element's
killed in a
Tasty
war.
electrolyte drink mix
All
provides
the
you with
others had
everything you
died
need
quite
and nothing you
tragically.
don't. Click the
And
link
I
in the
think
description or
that's
pinned
what
comment
they
below
didn't
to get
say
your
and what they
Element
didn't
sample
talk
pack for the
about.
cost of shipping,
I
which if
think
you live in the US is only $5.
led me to always kind of want to understand what is going on because it doesn't feel quite right. So I think those are the two pivotal things, really.
And when you look back at your childhood, do you find you were quite inquisitive at that time?
I was quiet. So I observed, which is a good trait for a therapist. So I listened a lot and I observed a lot. I didn't ask many questions. I kept on trying to work out what was going on without saying anything.
I see. And what did you want to be when you grew up?
I was brought up in a very old fashioned way. So I was brought up to get married and have kids. That was what I expected. I had no idea about work or working, or I just thought be the same as my mum. Turned out I wasn't.
But before you became a therapist, you had a decorating business. So how old were you at the time when that began and what pulled you that way?
So good knowledge, Jesse. You went back a long way. So I got married very young. I got married at 20. I'm still married 41 years later. Thank goodness. Um, and so I started decorating after we got married, and I started decorate when I was decorating our own houses, and then I got a job. And in a way, being a decorator is not so different from being a therapist. You have to work out what they want. You have to deal with all their anxieties. You have to deal with the couple relationship who are fighting about pink and green. You have to try and kind of find out what their vision is and what that means to them. And so, I mean, it was a very good kind of pathway to being a therapist. Yeah.
And how long were you involved in that business?
About 9 years. And then I from there I volunteered as a counselor. So I did so after I had my last son, my last child, when I was 29, I stopped the business and started counseling. So I've been counseling for like 33 years.
And what was that? You have 4 kids. So what was that like at the time to, go back to school, get an education? You have young kids at home. It's, a time in your life when things were probably quite busy and somewhat chaotic. How did you prioritize to go back and get this education?
So I did A levels, which I don't know if you have the same system in Canada. I did two A levels when I was 16, and then I did two A levels after I had my first daughter when I was 21. So I have always kind of wanted to know more and do more. Training to be a therapist is it was quite a juggle and really hard work. But the thing that it should come with is a kind of threat to your marriage, because I'd come back from a training day on relationships, on how to communicate, on every aspect of life, and start talking to my husband, or start asking him questions, or start fighting with him because he wasn't being what I thought he should be, now that I've kind of looked at how relationships should be. So he tolerated about 7 years of me making him do experiments. Like, I'd make him pretend he was on the edge of the swimming pool, and would he jump off, or would he go halfway down the side of the pool? And I mean, I think what helped is that we were both young. So we weren't set in our ways. We were still in our 30s. Um, but he was very tolerant.
And you mentioned at the beginning, you guys have now been married for 40 years. A huge congrats to you on that.
Thank you.
What would you say is some of the biggest keys that you could share with us that have been foundational for, keeping that strong support and that relationship strong over the years?
I think I think marriages, relationships, are made and not born. So, I mean, we were in love when we got married, and that is one way. It's a way into a relationship. But you need to commit to kind of working out the two kinds of people you are, given who you are individually, what you want, and how you're living your life. What we were good at is we were very good at communicating, not always. And that our secret, I think, one is that we're kind to each other, which is a big thing. But the other is that we walk and talk. So if there's a problem, and our children do it too. So my daughter's now 40. If they're cross with us, they say, let's go for a walk. And it can be, let's just go for a walk and have a nice time. But I always wonder, like, when it's let's go for a walk, is it because I've really annoyed them, or there's something going on, or they need. So we use walking, talking, because I think being in nature, the movement of your body together, being side by side, not eyeballing each other, um, means that you kind of sort things out. And my husband has actually said to me about 2 months ago, the thing, however busy you are, because I've been manically busy, you have to promise one walk every single weekend. So that's the only thing I ask. But every Saturday or Sunday, you have to promise that we'll have a walk. And I've kept that promise.
Let's go deeper into this. I've heard you talk about this practice before, and I think it can be helpful for all of us. So you're going for a walk, you're hashing things out. It can be with your kids, with your husband,
Or
and
all
then you
together.
come back or all together, and then you come back, and by that time you sorted through whatever it is that you needed to hash out. And I know if at that time, I've heard you state this before, you can go to your journal and do some writing at that time. Take it from there and explain what that process could look like.
I mean, I've made it sound very clean and tidy. If it's a big thing, you may not sort it out on the walk. So that you come back from the walk and you've aired what the difficulty is, you've tried talking it through, and you haven't, because you're both too raw and you're both holding on to your position. So sometimes you come back and all you've done is know what's not right. And you can take time, it can be sort of 6 hours later after journaling that you then maybe sit down and have a cup of tea, and then are able to reflect on the fight. So, I mean, I think that what makes marriages work is that you will always fight. You will always have disagreements. And the thing that matters is that you repair after the fight. And sometimes if it's a small thing, we can sort it out on the walk. If it's a big thing, it can take longer than a walk, but it's a very good beginning position. And with the kids, normally it kind of works stuff through um, on the walk. Normally we would. I mean, sometimes they'd storm off. When they were teenagers, there was no way they were going to come home with us. It was just like they, as they rightly should, and then we kind of sorted it out later, hopefully.
And an important part of this process I want to make sure we highlight is having some kind of mini celebration once you've done that work together and you've hashed things out. So it can be as simple as coming back and having a tea together, creating that almost boundary on that space that you've created to hash things out.
I mean, I think a ritual is a habit with soul. So we do have that ritual that, we go out, we do the thing, and by no means now after 41 years, we're not really fighting that much, to be absolutely honest, because most of the stuff has been sorted. But we come back and once we have sorted it out, we will always hug. We will always say, "I'm sorry I hurt your feelings," and we will probably have a cup of tea around the kitchen table or have supper. You come back together again and you've learned something and you often feel much closer. We then often watch something funny on telly. So we might watch a funny movie, or that thing of not having to then say or do anything, but let the movie do the thing, but sitting all around together, maybe with, duvets on or light the fire, that you feel close. So I always want us to do intentional things that you feel safe and close, because when you're fighting, you go into fight, flight, or freeze. Your system goes on alert. You're fighting, and your blood is running around your body. As you reflect, you can kind of go more into your cognitive self. You feel calmer, you sort things out, but then you need to have a real sense of safety and security, and that's the kind of final notch of it. And so developing as a family or as a couple, for you, what that is, and it will be very different for different people. For us, it's a funny movie.
And then if there's more work to be done on that subject, you would, maybe journal for a bit, and then you'd wait till you go for another walk to hash it out again. You wouldn't want to bring it up later on that evening at the dinner table and kind of drag that into your day to day. I know for
No.
you, it's important that you wait and have that protected time where you can converse and hash it out.
Yeah, I think so. What do you think? What do you do?
I don't know if I have a system like this that's as clean and tidy. I mean, I'm intrigued by what you're saying here, and I think it's a really good way of encapsulating it and creating a safe space where you can really do that work together. I do find a lot of times when we have some of our deepest, best conversations, my wife and I, we will go for a walk. And it just really opens us up to communicating on a deep level and really, I don't know, there's just something about it where it's a really
Being in nature.
conducive environment in
Yeah,
nature where you can really
space.
open up and have the space and oftentimes after hashing it out, and discussing whatever it is, you can come back and just feel so much better. I'm sure the walk is part of that as well, moving your body,
It's the
getting out, getting
movement.
some fresh air, sunshine. There's a lot of good things that are wrapped up in that
I think
practice.
it shifts your feelings, it shifts the clarity of your mind, and it shifts your body, and that's a very good kind of combination. A lot of people find cars. So some people won't talk in the car because it feels too confining. But if you've got teenage kids, they're in the back of the car. Often the only time you can ever get anything out of them is when they're in the back, and you just say, what, I can see you look a bit sad, or what's going on, and they'll talk to you in the car in the way that they never would to your face.
That's interesting. My daughter's so young, I'm not at that point yet, but I'll keep an eye out for it. And it's interesting, Julia, because you mentioned early on in our conversation how as a child growing up, communication wasn't something that was expressed. And now in your family and with your husband, that is such a priority and part of the success of your marriage. So would you say you've kind of overcompensated in a good way, but because of the way you're brought up and because of that lack of communication, as a family when you're a kid?
Yeah, I mean, I think training as a therapist, you kind of learn the importance of communication, and I think the secret weapon of communication is listening. It isn't always talking. I think people tend to transmit a lot and don't really listen enough. And so the thing I think that really matters in families is that, and in couples, is that you listen to each other, so you hear each other's perspectives. I think we can be so determined that our perspective is the one that's right. But in families, you need to allow multiple perspective and multiple views and ways of being. And that's through listening to each other much more than talking to each other. But I didn't do it as a counterbalance to my childhood. I think I did it. I think it is honestly wired in me, and I've learned how to do it. Um, so I think it's more as I've grown, I've changed, thank goodness, as and adapted. So I think it's more that than not.
So, Julia, I want to come back to your journey into becoming a therapist and where you are today with that. And I know your beginning started with working with families and supporting them who had lost babies and children. So, how did you get involved in that?
I know. I did that for 25 years in a big NHS hospital. It started because I worked with a charity where that supported mothers into the research around baby death. It was called Birthright, and up to that point, it's so I feel sort of ashamed. I didn't really know that babies died. I thought that that's happened in Victorian times. It didn't happen anymore. I was completely ignorant. But once I knew, I just felt drawn to it. And in the hospital where I had my children, I talked to some of the doctors and learned that there was no support for mothers and fathers when a baby died or when children died. There was nothing in the hospital. They had an appointment, they'd see the doctor 6 weeks after the death, and that was it. Um, so I offered to do it as a volunteer. So I did it as a volunteer for a year. I was literally put in a broom cupboard, no window, kind of hospital equipment on the side. Um, and then after that year, I think they did pay me a sort of small amount because I had to have a contract. And then I was there for another 25 years. So it was the most incredible kind of privilege, incredibly painful, very frightening at times. Um, but I felt like sitting in my little room, I learned about thousands of people's lives from all over the world. And one of the things I learned is that, we're as different uh, on the inside as we look on the outside. But when it comes to grieving, there is a universality of it that we all share. That you could be talking to someone who was born in a completely different continent, in a different world. And really, what they would be saying wouldn't be that different from someone who was born around the corner.
And what are some of the pillars of the grieving process that you'd see over and over again?
I think when a child dies, it sort of tears up the rule book of life. So the thing that is so devastating is the, they're grieving for the family that they pictured and hoped for, that they had every right to hope for. And it tears up their trust. Like, who am I if this 7-year old can die, or this 2-year old can die, or I can have a stillbirth at 40 weeks? What do I trust in life? Who am I? A mother? Am I a father? How do I dare to live again and love again? It takes you to the core of yourself, and it's sort of rubble, and you have to kind of rebuild to dare to love and live despite the pain.
And as a mom, how can you go to work every day and deal with all the sadness and working with people and then, come home and quote unquote switch it off? You're not really switching it off, but you know what I mean. How do you pivot when you're dealing with such intense emotions day to day at work?
I think some of it was sort of I had systems, so I'd always walk home, I'd do a breathing meditation, I'd have an image that I used to kind of switch from one place to the other. But it, because for so many years I heard stories and saw things that are very, very rare, but for me they were kind of normalized. I am much more frightened. So, like my grandchildren, I chop up their grapes into kind of eight because I know children can die of grapes. So that everything that a child does, I know that you can die from. So it does affect me, but I kind of have learned to live with it, and I annoy my children because I'm like, at times when I shouldn't be, when they're just, slipping or whatever it is, doing something normal for a child. So I don't think I've come out of it unscathed, but I have also means that I'm amazingly grateful for life, for my people that I love life and my grandchildren's life. And so kind of it goes both depths of you. On the one hand, you're more frightened and you see more danger, but the other hand, you feel the richness of having the life that you have. And I feel enormously grateful for that.
And coming out of that experience, you mentioned 25 years working in that environment. Is that when you decided to write on grief, or
Yes.
what caused that pivot in your career?
Well, I never really had any intention of writing a book. I felt everybody had said everything. I didn't think I had anything to say. Um, but I left St. Mary's and I had private practice, and a book editor, a book agent heard me on the radio and asked me if obviously I'd been asked a lot to write a book and would I think of writing a book? And I said no one had ever actually asked me, and no, I hadn't wanted to. It's like homework forever. Why would I ever want to write a book? And she was very gentle with me. She's Felicity Rubinstein, my agent now. And she said, just do a proposal. It's not very much work. See what happens if you get a decent offer. And so I did. And what I discovered was that I have this amazing memory of stories of people's lives that I didn't know that I had. So I have this massive kind of memory bank of videos of people, of images. So it just poured out of me. And it turns out I have a lot to say. And it's been a wonderful thing to be able to do. It's been life expanding, writing the book and meeting people who've read the book, and that's been an amazing thing.
And as somebody who's, helped so many people through a time of immense grief, what can you say to, me and the listeners and viewers right now? What's the best way to handle that? Because I think a lot of times, especially if we haven't been through a lot of, turmoil in life and had people in our lives that are dealing with, maybe death and grieving over different things, it can be a really awkward position to know how to properly address that person and to properly support them. So what would you say as somebody who's, been such a supporter of people grieving in the most extreme way? What can we do to give them that support they need when people are going through immense grief?
I think the most important thing is that it's the love and connection from others that enables the person who's bereaved to survive when someone they love so significantly has died. So to kind of recognize that your love and connection to them is the thread that they need more than anything else, given that their life has just kind of blown up for them. So recognize that you're important. And in doing that, acknowledge to your friend or family member the loss. Don't try and fix it. Don't try and make it better. Don't say things like they've gone to a better place. Just acknowledge and name the devastation. I'm so sorry that your child, your whoever it is, has died. Um, and if you're a close friend, show up. Sending texts does not do the business, because the thing about grieving is that the person that's grieving, their emotions are contagious. So even if you saw them on the screen, there you would read in their eyes, their face, their body language that they are in huge amounts of pain. And so being with someone that is really suffering, there's a whole part of us that goes into fight or flight and just wants to leg it. And so the best thing that you can do, the thing of just being with them, staying with them, being beside them, is a huge act of love and makes an enormous difference. So recognize just being with the person and listening, as I said before, is that sort of key component of communicating, is a huge gift to them and will make an enormous difference. And recognize that grief take is a lifetime's process. I don't mean that in a depressing way because it changes over time, but be in it for the long haul. It takes longer than anybody wants or chooses. And so if you are a really close friend, you need to be in it with them for the long haul.
That's where I wanted to go next. How long can that process last? I'm sure it's different, depending on the severity of the case and on the individual and the resilience. But I'm sure with a lot of these situations, people can get a lot of support up front from family and friends, and then that can quickly dwindle when, that person's most likely, I'm sure, if they're going through, a death in the family or if somebody close to them, that's going to last, like you said, a lifetime. So I think it's important to highlight that this does go on for a long time, and as supporters in that person's life, to touch base and stay connected, and like you said, to listen over an extended period of time, and as somebody close to them over a lifetime, because we all need that support.
I mean, you said it perfectly, and I think people, as you say, it's very individual. You're affected by the circumstances, the death, your history of loss, the support you have at the time, many aspects of it. But the thing that I think people often don't recognize is that the task of mourning is to allow yourself to feel the pain, to face the reality of the death, that this person or this baby or child is no longer in your life, and find a way of accommodating that, finding a way of learning to live with that. But also the love for that person never dies. So the love and the relationship, despite their death, continue. So as a friend, if you can be the friend that they can talk to about the person that's died, you will be an amazing friend because they will want to go on talking and being heard. And maybe sometimes they won't. So let them be who they are as well. Sometimes they'll want to just have fun and put it down and go out and forget and kind of block it. And so that you need to kind of let them be who they are when they are. Someone often, I've worked with widows, and other people have a prescribed amount of time that you're allowed to grieve for, and prescribed that you're not. And I've worked with people who've gone into a new relationship maybe 4 months after the death, and all their friends are kind of muttering, "Oh, it's too soon." Oh. But actually, none of us know what we need, or it's very unique and what's right for us. So we need to kind of just let people be who they are.
You've touched on this briefly, but as the person going through the grieving, how can we best facilitate, moving through that in a healthy way and not just, pushing it to the side and trying to avoid it? How do we move through that in the most healthy way?
I mean, I think first of all to recognize that grief has a momentum and a kind of force of its own that you can't control it. It's not a tidy, phased thing that you can decide, I'm going to go through the denial phase and then I'm going to go through this phase. You can feel all the different feelings at the same time. And I think the key is that it's a oscillating process that you can move between allowing yourself to feel the pain and finding ways of expressing it, and then time to be restorative, to be okay, to get on with life, to go back to work, to have fun, to have a drink, to avoid the pain. And the process of grieving is the movement between the two. And that as human beings, we're born and wired adaptive. And so to do the things for me, who I find myself to be, that support me to be adaptive. Um, and that will include lots of things. It will include exercise. It will include time to focus on your grief. It will include time with friends. It will include time alone. It will include finding meaning in the loss, probably. I mean, you can't always prescribe that, but might include journaling. So everyone will have to find their own kind of way. Um, but the big thing is not to fight it, as you said. The things you do to block the pain are, in the end, the things that do you harm over time.
And to me, it seems like there's two distinct ways of looking at this. When you're actually going through the grieving in a real life situation, and then somebody who's listening to this right now who maybe isn't going through grief, but they want to build up that resilience because, going through periods where we're going to have grief and we're going to be grieving is part of life. So taking that time and that knowing that that's just part of what you're going to be going through. And you mentioned things like exercise and building relationships. So doing those things so you have that foundation in place to transition more quickly, even though it's not a quick, again, it can be a whole lifetime moving through grief, but to help facilitate moving through that in the healthiest way possible.
This may be a big statement, but I reckon there probably isn't anybody in the globe that isn't grieving a living loss right now. So although they may not be grieving from the death of someone they love, there is nobody that I think who is a sentient being that hasn't grieved a living loss, what I call a living loss, which is in my second book, This Too Shall Pass. In that, from the structure, from all the ways of living, all the, loss of jobs, loss of connection, loss of family, all the things that people have grieved this last 15 months, has all the emotions. So people haven't, a lot of people have grieved from death, but even those that aren't bereaved from death will have had the emotions of grief of sadness, fury, despair, feeling numb, feeling lost, feeling confused, feeling hopeless, helpless. I think most people have had versions of that. Some it'll be at gale force 10, and others it will be a lower version, but everybody will have felt it at some level.
So when you say living loss, just to kind of define that, are we talking about any kind of change we're going through except for dealing with the death?
So living loss, I don't mean like any change, but it's a significant change. So um, breaking up in a relationship, changing jobs, moving house, moving country, and in COVID, it's been being on furlough, not having your structure and purpose. It can be fearing you're going to lose your job, losing confidence in what your life is going to look like now. All the different, the fear of for your health in a way that you never have before. Before you stepped out into the street and you walk down the street with a kind of neutral feeling, walking down the street with other people as vectors of illness that can kill you is like a loss. That seeing other people as threats is a loss. All the fun and things that kind of enabled us to manage all the kind of hard things of work were taken away. Grieving being in a cafe, in a pub, you don't have pubs in Canada, in a bar, having a party, dancing, all of those things. I think we're grieving.
Well, let's use that
Have you
example.
felt that?
Yeah, no, I know what you're saying totally, and I want to grab onto an example you used there of switching a job and pick that apart a little bit because there can be a planned and unplanned change involved in that. And let's talk about how that can differently affect that situation. So being fired from a job, being forced to find new work versus, you know, having an exit strategy planned and, taking time and ahead of time thinking of what that next move's going to be and leaving work that maybe you're not so happy with.
I mean, I'm the death person, so it is the equivalent of having a good death and a bad death. There is such a thing as a good death. Someone dying in old age who dies painlessly at home, and you've said your goodbyes and there's no regrets. So, in the same way with a job, there is a good ending of a job and a bad ending of a job. And basically, the less control you have, the more shocking it is, the more it comes out of a clear blue sky, and the more it affects your self esteem and your confidence in yourself, then the bigger the loss it is. And, fear absolutely kind of overtakes you. Having said that, even, I mean, I don't know if this is true when you talk about your wife, even changes that we choose, like going to a new job, the process of adaptation of the things that we want, it's still a bit uncomfortable. Finding our new way with our new colleagues, finding out our role. Can I do this? A little bit of imposter syndrome, all of those things, even in a job that you've got the job that you really wanted, is a bit scary. It puts you out of your comfort zone. And that's really good because from that you do grow, and you need to dare to grow to build yourself through your life, and that you don't want to live below your comfort zone. But even that process of change uses up psychological energy, and it can feel like a lot.
So what I'm gathering you saying here, and this is what I wanted to get to, so I'm happy it came around to that, is that change can be felt and have to, deal with what comes to that, even if it's a positive. So change could be a positive or negative. It's still going to impact us either way. And then what I was getting at too, to kind of layer on top of that, is you can have planned versus unplanned. There's kind of just different variables speaking on change.
So I kind of often talk about gears when I'm with clients. Like, so the unplanned out of the blue takes you up to kind of fourth gear, really frightened, into fight or flight or freeze, and you're not sleeping, you're sweating and all of that. The sort of planned is more like two or three, depending on what happens. So you having a baby, for instance, obviously you really wanted a baby and it's wonderful having a baby, but it's a massive change. It's a massive change for the couple, for your wife, for you, who you are now as a dad, your identity, but your purpose and your exhaustion levels. I mean, all of it, how you negotiate. I mean, when I look at my kids, and I remember from when I had kids, the main thing they do with their partners is negotiate sleep and tasks. It's like sleep is the gold, like when you've got young kids, right? And who does the nights and the mornings and all of that. And so that is a massive change that you have to find a new way of being in yourself, of how you become a parent and how you are as a couple and who you are.
So I can see how having a child definitely causes a dramatic change in lifestyle for both parents right away. And that's going to be an ongoing thing as it goes through different phases over a lifetime. But what about something more static, like a wedding day? And that's a big change in two people's lives where they're now married and two become one. How long? Because we talked about before how grieving over a death could take like that would be something that would be with you for a lifetime. But if it's one of these what was the word you used when it's a non-death
A
change?
living loss.
Living loss. I don't know if that would apply to getting married because it's not a loss again, but
It's a loss of your singledom. It's a loss of choice. So at the moment that you commit to get married and the day that you finally get married, you lose the freedom of all those other glorious women. Or I think you maybe have a polyamorous relationship, who knows? But if you don't, um, you lose all the choices of the other relationships and you commit to one person. So every choice is the end of something and the beginning of something else. It is much worse in life not making choices. People who live in limbo land, who kind of go neither way, are much more miserable. So I think we need to make the choices, but we need to recognize that they're never for free. You always lose something when you choose something else.
so using that example, living loss when you get married, and again, it's going to cause big changes. How long can that impact somebody for? Because again, we talked, I want to come back and just make sure I'm reiterating losing someone's going to affect you for a lifetime. But when you have these big milestones in life and make changes, how long in the background are those, affecting you, at least on a subconscious level? I know it's going to be different again, depending on the person and what the situation is,
And how long you've
but
been together.
I don't think a lot of people give credit to maybe how long that adjustment phase takes. And that's what I'm trying to get at here.
Yeah.
Just so people can understand that these milestone shifts in their life, you got to be gentle with yourself and realize that this is something that's going to be impacting you in certain ways for a lifetime because there's, these changes do affect hopefully for a lifetime when it comes to marriage. But, that background change and that adjustment, just so we can be gentle on ourselves, how long can some of that be in the background?
I love the way you say be gentle on ourselves. And I think what I find is that people who think that you should seamlessly be married and then be happily married, or not have that disquiet of the discomfort of change, feel that somehow they're failing and everybody else is sorted. Like, what am I doing wrong? So the kind of universal connector with anyone who comes through my door, whatever the presenting issue, is that they have an uneasy relationship with change and they somehow think that they're doing change wrong. So you're asking me, within marriage, how long does that feeling of disquiet last? It is very unique. I couldn't say, but normally it takes longer. The adaptation internal process takes much longer than, say, the ceremony, and it could be kind of 3 to 6, 9 months of kind of really recognizing and integrating this new way of life. And
Got it. And I was just using the marriage as an example because it could be switching a career and again, just again being gentle on ourselves as we go through these big pivots in life.
completely. And also to um, to talk about it together, like you're both feeling it, not hide it from each other. I think helps speed it up because you go, oh, it's not just me. Like she's, you can assume that by not voicing it, you can assume that somehow you're failing already, and you've only just got married.
Well, voicing it makes me think of the stories reading in your latest book, preparing for this. It's really interesting just, because you go into great detail sharing these stories of the clients that you're working with. And I think that can be relatively uncommon these days to see that other side of people, the deeper thought process and what people are going through, especially in the modern world with social media where we're often portraying our best selves and that's what we're being bombarded with on a day-to-day basis. A lot of us that consume that. But your book was really refreshing to see that other side and to see that commonality as humans, the ebbs and flows that we're all going through, and to see that, like you mentioned earlier, the similarities that we all share as human beings.
Yeah, I'm so glad you like that. And the reason I wrote the book was I think the most personal is the most universal. That people talk to a therapist, kind of revealing their internal processes in a way they may not talk to anybody else. And so, as you say, in this sort of perfected, punching the air, living my best life version of the world, we kind of think we're constantly the one that isn't doing it right. But actually, reading all of those case studies, you see that everyone is worried or conflicted or stuck or unhappy or sad, and that they need to find a way of processing that to then free them to step into the next version of themselves that they find themselves to be. And one of the things that doing the research for the book showed me is that, we're changing all the time, but the 7 year itch is a thing. We tend to change quite significantly every 7 to 8 years. And the people that adapt and support themselves to change are the people that thrive. They are the ones that do have the best life if they don't block it.
And what about people who are going through major changes and, they're doing all they can ahead of time to build resilience and to, move through that as gracefully as possible, but maybe people in their life aren't seeing it that way and they don't feel like, this is maybe the best move to start a family or, move homes or change career and maybe this is coming from somebody within the immediate family or pressure from
Parents or
parents or friends. How do people go about navigating that when they don't have the support to go through change from the people they most care about that are surrounding them?
I mean, I think it makes the process much harder. If the people that manage change well is when they feel supported by the significant people in their life, their village, their kind of best friends. And so if everybody is kind of against it, well, one, maybe they should pay attention because are they seeing something that you're not seeing? But also, in the end, it is their life and their decision. Um, and I guess they have to find support in other places from other people when they can't get it from the existing people. So, I mean, one of the things I really want to emphasize is that relate the quality of relationships in our lives defines the quality of our life, and that you may have someone who doesn't agree with you, but they will be the kind of person who will be honest with you and say I don't agree, but still support you if you make it your decision. And those are the kind of relationships that you want. What you don't want is relationships with people who don't agree with you and then withdraw when you don't pay attention, when you're not following what when they want to control you. So you want people who are advocates for you and believe in you and trust you and tell you difficult truths, but who in the end support you to be who you want to be.
And I totally agree with you on the importance of relationships and surrounding yourself with people that really care about you and you can have deep conversations with. But I find, as I get older in life, that can be more challenging to form those relationships. So, what do you say when you're working with clients and they're, not in those early years, like when you're a kid and when you're a teen, and it seems like organically those relationships just form, and what if somebody hasn't maintained those over the years and they're looking to form those relationships later on in life? How do you help people, create that?
So I think in different phases of your life, friendships can really come under pressure, putting time aside to have friendships. And yet friendships still really matter. So, like in the phase that you are with young children and working and all of that, probably choosing friends who are kind of in your life through baby groups or the life that you're leading. Those are the friends to invest in for now, because your friends that you were at university with who are in a different state, that is too big a leap. It's a barrier. So kind of make it simple, but still make friends with the people you've got, and the others, the real friends, you will find them again in a few years' time when the pressure lessens.
Yeah, and there's something to say about quality of relationships too. If you try and spread yourself too thin and have too many different people in your life, it keeps those relationships often very superficial and probably not the relationships that are gonna facilitate, like you said, happiness and well-being.
Can you see your family? Have you seen your family in lockdown?
Yes, yes, been able to see family, you know, uh, and that's been a huge support system. What about you?
So I was going to say the other big priority is your family, if they're not, in all over the world, or even when they are all over the world. So yes, I was very lucky. I saw my children a lot. Um, they live near me, so we went for walks all the time. We had lunches together. I saw them a lot, which was really, really nice, and actually kept me sane, probably.
But on the other end of the spectrum, what if somebody in your close family is somebody that you don't that, maybe it's just them in general or they're going through a certain time and they're depleting your energy and pulling from you. How do you go about, keeping that relationship and not abandoning the person, but guarding and creating that boundary for yourself as well so you can maintain your well-being?
That is a complicated question, Jesse. Um, I think you have to recognize the limits in some of your family relationships. And, I do think estrangement, where you don't speak to a family member at all, costs you enormously psychologically. And we know that, for instance, a third of all sibling relationships are estranged relationships. Um, so my my frame, if I'm working with a client or with myself, is to keep the relationships going as best you can, and um, but also kind of recognize that with the uniqueness of every being, that some are going to be stronger and closer than others, and so let them be what they are. You can't kind of force things that are not naturally there. Accept the people for who they are and love them for who they are.
And what about when it comes to the relationship with oneself? Earlier, I know you mentioned journaling. How do we go about strengthening that and keeping that, in a good place?
Well, I mean, we could spend 3 hours talking about that, Jesse.
Well,
But
let's
I
let's see
think
what comes to your mind first here. I think
the
this is an important one to get into. We've talked a lot about, relationship with others, but it's important to facilitate a healthy relationship with yourself. And I don't think a lot of people necessarily do it or at least think about it this way. So let's open up the book and talk about me again, journaling. Is this one of the tools people can use? And how can we go about doing that work?
journaling is certainly one of the ways. The relationship with yourself is the primary relationship that forms all the other relationships. So if you have a very negative relationship with yourself, using what I call a shitty committee, where you're constantly criticizing yourself and attacking yourself, you are diminishing how you feel, your confidence, and your capacity to be in relationship with other people. So one of the first things is to kind of go inwards and give yourself some time and attention as you would a person. And one of the things I kind of think about in relationship to yourself, and in a way you use the term be gentle, and in another way of saying that is be as kind and self-compassionate to yourself as you would another person. So you would never speak to another person saying, "You idiot, you fool, how could you be such a ooh," kind of be aware of what is going on in your head and dial it down. And sometimes writing down in your journal what you're saying to yourself, what you're criticizing to yourself, can help you kind of recognize and change the habit. But also kind of supporting yourself to be who you are, in this kind of age, as you talked about, of sort of perfectionism, kind of allow yourself to be all of yourself with your imperfections, the things that you find more difficult, your strengths, that we're not, we are complex beings with many different aspects that we need to support in all of ourselves, not just the sort of presenting performative version that we want the world to see, but our full authentic self, which includes being rubbish at some things. And I mean, recently I have been rubbish at my diary. I have literally double booked, not turned up, cancelled, all sorts of stuff. And I'm blaming COVID, but that isn't the me I'd like to be. But it also is who I find myself to be. And turning on myself, like swearing at myself that I'm an idiot, is not going to improve that. To kind of just be a bit gentle, self compassionate, forgive myself, say sorry to the people, take a breath and start again. Like, whew,
Do you personally take time on a regular basis to journal and write down your feelings and thoughts?
I do journal for about 5 minutes every single night. So I do not always take my own medicine, but on that one, I do. Yeah.
Is that something you recommend to clients often to journal and exercise?
Exercise, if you're only going to do one of them, mine would be exercise. Because I think that thing of your body being home and being safe, and that all the feelings of living losses and grief from death make you frightened. It feels like fear or freeze. And exercise is the single fast track um, act that we can take that lowers that level of fear. And our nice guidelines, which is I like our sort of government guidelines on health, say that regular exercise is the equivalent to a low dose of antidepressants. Can you hear my church bell? That's very English. That's quite
Yeah,
good for the pod.
I
Um,
like it.
the exercise is the equivalent to a low dose of antidepressants. I don't think people kind of recognize how exercise helps your mental health as much as your physical health.
And is there a certain type of exercise you recommend to people? Is it more to go for jogging, walking? We talked about walking extensively earlier, lifting weights, or is it just about moving the body?
Moving the body, do the thing that you can develop the habit. So the thing that has least barriers for you to choosing to do it, even if it's only for 10 minutes. That BJ Fogg, The Power of Tiny Habits. So choose the thing that you like doing, not the one that you hate doing. And even if you only do it for 10 minutes, do it every day and give yourself a treat. And we develop good habits by being pleased with ourselves. So if you make it tiny and small and achievable, then you come back, you're really pleased with yourself. You're more likely to do it the next day. And that's how you build them. But you know this, Jessie, because you're good at this stuff.
I want to pick your brain though. And when it comes to change, I mean, you're in a really, special position being a therapist and having people come to you probably oftentimes, if not all the time, when they're going through pain and need help transitioning through that change. What do you think about that in a larger sense though? Is that often I'm guessing it must be often the motivator of change, being in pain. But is it always the motivator? Can somebody just be listening to us right now or watching this conversation and be like, I want to change this aspect of my life? How often do you think that happens versus being in a position where they're under the crunch and life's throwing them a curveball?
I think it happens less because I think we find change, we resist change. We find it a bit scary. But I think if they're listening to a podcast and they're in quite a good place, they're quite happy, but they want to kind of optimize their well-being, that can support change too, even if it's from like a small habit. So I don't think you always have to suffer to change, but I think it's more likely.
And we talked about social media before. I'm curious, how do you go about personally handling that in a healthy way? Being somebody who's, an author, an influencer, how do you go about keeping that balance given what we talked about before where people are putting their you know, best face and filtered and then how do you go about handling that with clients and help them navigate that world in a healthy way?
So to go back one step, I, our sense of identity um, as a person is the need to love and belong. And I think the importance of our getting that need met in our private relationships where we can be fully ourselves and known where we love and belong is really important. That we are our authentic selves, our vulnerable selves in safe private places, I think really, really matters. I think we can then develop an authentic public version of ourselves that very much links, but does not expose all of ourselves. I personally struggle quite a lot with my social media. So I'm going to be probably too vulnerable now, but I am addictive by nature. So I could easily be obsessed by it. So I have to, I turn off my phone at 8 o'clock at night and not till 8 in the morning. Otherwise I would check it before I go to bed and freak myself out. I am a people pleaser because that's part of being a therapist. I want people to like me. So there's all of that that bothers me with social media. I was brought up to be someone who is private. Like you don't go and shout about the things that you do and you don't show off and you don't speak about yourself. And therapists should be private in rooms and nobody should see them. So there are lots of messages I'm having to kind of navigate my way around in the hope and my intention from social media, there's an airplane, is to connect with people who want the sort of information and knowledge and wisdom that I've learned over 30 years and that it's useful for them. So I want it to be useful. And it's also to promote my books or the work that I'm doing. It's a kind of combination. It's business. It's because I'm a therapist and I really want to reach as many and wide an audience as I can. Um, but also when I like being liked, I feel bad about being liked. So I mean, it's a complex old thing, social media, and it's new to me. I only opened my account like 15 months ago.
Well, that's what I wanted to get into. The fact that, you've been doing this for a long time and this is a relatively new phenomenon. So you've seen both sides, life as a therapist before social media and now opening yourself up to that world. So that must be an interesting transition to have that happen within, your career.
Let me just say, it's uncomfortable. I'm not at ease with it. I mean, lots of it I really like. I feel like Instagram and Facebook, I feel like I've connected with people who I sort of feel like I know. They tell me a lot of stuff. I reply. It feels very nice. I really It's supported me, particularly in the dark days of lockdown. Our January, February was really, really bleak. It kind of was a lifeline for me in lots of ways. So there's a lot going for it, I think. But, navigating all the kind of thoughts in my head is also quite a process.
Well, you touched on something there I want to go a bit deeper into, and that's using social media, or it could be, we could use other examples, video games, binge watching TV, using those during times of change. Say it's a negative change, like going through a divorce and you're dealing with all the stress and uncomfortable feelings. In your case, you're talking about going through the pandemic and just things being, less than optimal for and you're, going through the stress of that, which we're all going through. But is it ever healthy to use these things, like I mentioned, to help us distract from that stress. Not to avoid it totally, but maybe have set periods of time when we really get in there and feel it. And then also use these to have breaks from, going through that. So using it in a healthy balance.
I 100% think it's healthy. I think we need distraction. We cannot go in and immerse ourselves in all of what we're feeling all of the time, and nor can we be active, productive, useful all of the time. Sometimes we just need to noodle and distract and be amused by somebody else, or doing a game. So I definitely think there's a place for distraction. And sometimes that distraction can free you from, the looping thoughts in your head that are driving you crazy. And actually, when you come back from the distraction, there's some clarity. So it can give you a break from the loop that can clarify and be useful. So the difficulty is that all of these things, games, Instagram, are made to give us dopamine hits to hook us, little clicks of being addicted. So the difficulty is the balance and finding the balance and maintaining the balance. And I think that is really hard.
Especially with all these different things. We only named a few of them, but maybe you're spending time on social media distracting and then getting caught up in a video game and then watching a couple shows with your significant other before bed, and it's like when you add all that up, that can be out of balance, but while you're going through each activity as a singular thing, it might be within balance. So you got to really kind of, because we have so much bombardment and so many
Yeah.
things that are distractions and grabbing our attention, we need to be aware as a whole is what I'm getting at.
Yes, I think that's a really, really good point. I tell you what has come up in therapy in a way that has never come up in therapy in my 30, whatever it is, 2, 3 years, is families negotiating television or, watching stuff together. So often people are just watching separately in their room. But when they're wanting to, as couples, I think couples want to watch together because it's a companionable thing to do. The deals and negotiations that couples have to go through because no one's going out. So they're watching telly every night between the thriller, the documentary, the love story, the whatever it is. It's never come up in therapy before. And now it's a big part of people's kind of lives. I don't know if you find that, Jesse.
Well, an important thing too is to realize that this is fictional, a lot of this stuff too. So if you're basing your own reality off of watching certain shows and the way they go about working or their relationships work, it's important to not, just like social media, coming back to that, it's a skewed perception that we don't want to compare our real life with.
Completely. Or how we look, or the clothes, and all that stuff. Yeah, it's totally escapism.
Agreed. And we talked about the pandemic. Let's use this as our example to pivot into this next subject. I want to talk about uncertainty because we've been in this pandemic. You mentioned 15 months and we're still in it. We don't know where it's all going, and that's just one example because there's a lot of uncertainty in life in general. So what can we do in two different ways as we're going through something like the pandemic to build our resilience to uncertainty? And then again, just in general, to build that up, because that's a skill and a tool we need as a human being to navigate through life in a healthy way. How do you recommend to people that you're working with to build that resilience and to be able to handle that in a healthy way?
I mean, my kind of starting point is that the pandemic has revealed and in some way intensified a truth that has always been there, which is that life is uncertain. We are never certain about life or death. I could be run over this evening. The things that we really mind about can go dramatically wrong. But we, I think, successfully and usefully deny that for most of the time. So the pandemic has made us look at what we have never wanted to look at, which is our mortality and the fact that we have no control over the things that matter to us most. The other thing that I kind of think about is that where certainty ends, hope begins. Where you have, possibility, you have hope. And so I think you have to look at the difficulty of not knowing and look at the dark and face it and name it and let yourself know what those feelings are and how difficult you find them, and talk to your friends or your partner, walk and talk about them, kind of acknowledge the difficulty of the not knowing. And then I think you have to intentionally turn to hope, turn to the light. And it is hope that turns a life around. But it isn't just a feeling, it is an attitude and a way of being, that we kind of have a realistic plan A and a plan B about what we hope for, and the belief that we can make it happen. And that even glimmer of hope for that little plan can give us, it changes our physiology. So having hope means that you have more optimism, means that you have less fear. That means you're more likely to be open to good things, to new things. You're more open to connection. You're more likely to make better decisions that are good for you in your life. And so having that not only makes the living of it better, but can influence your outcome.
And for somebody who is going through darker times right now, and maybe the pandemic's part of that, maybe they lost their job, and who knows, we could throw a whole bunch of stuff onto that, but they're not feeling any hope right now. How do they start to build that? Like, what's a small step they can do if they're feeling hopeless right now to get that momentum going and hopefully facilitate it building over time?
Do you know, I think rituals really help. So if you're feeling completely bleak and full of despair, and hopeless and furious, maybe, but if you can create one tiny ritual, and it might be lighting a candle, you know, at the end of your workday, or if you're not working, at the end of the day, that you put a candle in a place somewhere significant in your apartment or wherever you live, and you just light the candle and then leave it and blow it out before you go to bed. That kind of can be a small thing that signifies many things, but can signify that, that there is hope. Um, and I think that can be very meaningful. I think rituals can really help us in the darkest of times. Eating together around a table, even if you're all miserable, being together, sitting together can really help. Um, Creating rituals that support you and give you structure when you feel like your life is falling apart.
What about gratitude? Is that something you bring light to a lot of the people you're working with?
It's so hard, gratitude, isn't it? Because when someone is full of fury and rage, for me to say and be grateful that you have a roof over your head, or be grateful that you're alive, or but of course you're completely right. Again, gratitude, when you have very little, being grateful for what you do have, you're more likely to get what you want. Rather than always thinking you're a victim, I'm never going to get what I want, you're less likely to get what you want. So people who are grateful have better outcomes. But I think it's sensitivity to timing. So I think, I would never say to someone, be grateful, but I would kind of collaborate with them with ideas and things that they can do that can support them. And I might say, maybe at the end of the day, just think of one thing that you're pleased about happened today, or that you're grateful that happened today. It was a delicious orange. Keep it simple. That you had a hug with your partner. So just, you know pop it in your head, or ideally pop it down in a book, and then you build a tapestry of gratitudes, and that weaves kind of energy and hope into your system, and that can really make a difference. But I think it's how you frame it, how, people then won't resist.
Got it. Earlier, you touched on mortality, and I'm just curious, how important do you think this is that people think about the end of their life and think about death while they're living as an exercise to free themselves of that uncertainty in a way. I mean, there's still going to be a ton of uncertainty in that realm, but I don't think most people like to talk about it, to think about it. And I'm an advocate the other way, and I'm just curious your thoughts.
I'm completely with you, Jesse. I think when we kind of face what we fear in every aspect of life, and certainly in death, that we talk about it and talk about it with people closest to us and talk about, what, whether we want to be buried or cremated, talk about what we're frightened of, talk about what we believe happens after we die. Not only does it mean that we faced our fears, feel very grateful for being alive, and have more kind of engagement in life, but it also does protect our family. The sort of big derailer of death, of bereavement, is the regrets, all the what ifs, or the things that you don't know, or the conversations that you didn't have. And they can drive people completely mad for a really, really long time. And I think we all have a kind of magical thinking that if I think or talk about death, it's going to make it happen. And we kind of need to recognize that we are all going to die. People closest to us are all going to die. We don't know when we're going to die. We have hope that we're going to live long and healthy life and that you'll live as healthy and as long as possible. But given that we are all mortal, the more we can protect our family and recognize the value of our life by recognizing the fact that we're going to die, really, I think, improves the quality of our life while we're alive.
And doing what you do for a living, I'm guessing you've worked with a number of people that have been at the end of their life and you've had to, you know, talk it out and listen with them and be there to help support them through that. If that is the
I'm
case,
doing it now. I've got clients now who are dying.
got it. If that is the case, because you have such a rare glimpse at that, I mean, a lot of us have dealt with family members and stuff that have passed, but maybe not had a chance to have deeper conversations beforehand, or maybe have been lucky enough not to have a lot of death in their life. What are some of the things that come to light during that time when you're having those conversations with people that we can take, you know, while we're alive and healthy and kind of reframe the way we think about things and reprioritize how we spend our time day to day? What can you share with us?
When it comes down to it, it's love. When people face their own death and when they look back at their life, they do not, they may look at some of their successes but really what gives their life meaning and what they need in the present as they're facing their death is is loved ones, is their family members, is their closest friends, and that they have the conversations that are important to have about telling them that they love them, sharing memories together of how much what fun they've had, creating a memory bank even while they're dying of memories for the people, for the family that are going to live after them, filming each other, doing little things. If they're ill, it's hard to do very much. In COVID, it's been terrible for people who are dying because all of the things they hope to create, they haven't been able to do. And they haven't been able to see some family members, like their own children, when they're dying, which has been horrendous. But, you know, really, it's love that is the most precious thing in the end. And creating the time and the place and the energy to feel that intimacy and closeness with the people we love most.
Do you feel that working with people on their deathbed has really had a profound shift on you as a person and your priorities and how you go about, spending your time?
I most of the time I do, and then sometimes I'm just a shallow idiot. So, so I I I want it to make me a profoundly better person, and it doesn't always do that, unfortunately.
Well, I think that's an important piece. I mean, not being striving for perfection and being hard on ourselves, like you've had a rare glimpse into a lot of people, it sounds like, that have been, at the end of their life. But, you know, It's easy to get caught up in the mundane of day-to-day life as well. It doesn't make you immune to that.
No, I mean, I feel like I have been changed and learned most from the people that I've worked with. And that feels an amazing, I feel really, really privileged and blessed to have had those experiences. I don't think it necessarily makes me a good person. I think I can still be a real pain in the ass and stuff. Ask my
All
family.
of us can be. And again, that's an important thing I think a lot of people get from reading your book, that none of us are perfect, and
And shouldn't
it
even
is a
try to
rare
be. I mean, it doesn't exist.
no. No. And the thing is this is a rare glimpse as a therapist, somebody who's gotten to spend that time with people and their vulnerability and your vulnerability with them. And that's what your book provides, to see what the true human experience is, and to humanize what we're all going through. And I think this conversation did that in a big way as well. And I want to thank you for your time and for having such a deep, vulnerable conversation with me and sharing so much. And other than listeners getting a copy of your latest book, This Too Shall Pass, how can they connect with you after the show?
They can follow me on Instagram and Facebook. Um, and that would be lovely to connect with them. And because I do little videos of things around grief or mental health, and I do lots of interviews with people. So it would be lovely if they connect with me there. And had loved this conversation, Jesse. I've really had such an interesting connecting time. It's amazing. We've had this conversation. We've never met, never spoken. And it feels like well, you didn't tell me much about you, but I feel like very open, and it's felt a really lovely conversation. And I must say, I went to Canada for Grief Works, my first book, and I had the most amazing experience there. It's a country I want to go back to, and I feel very proud that my book is being published in Canada. And thank you for reading it.
My pleasure. It was fantastic. And what part of Canada did you visit?
I only went to Toronto, but I was there 4 days, and I did lots of different events and met lots of different people, and did lots of radio shows and TV shows, and but I had such a wonderful time. I felt very welcomed. I felt people were very warm. Um, I really wanted to stay, and it felt so different from the US. I mean, you are a very different country with a very different psyche as a nation, I thought.
Well, thank you. And hopefully, if you come back and visit, or if I'm over in the UK, which I've never been to, we can
You've
connect in
never
person
been?
someday. No, no, I
Yes,
haven't. I've done some
Jesse.
traveling, but I haven't been to the UK, and it's on the bucket list most definitely. And maybe we'll be able to connect someday in person. That'd be wonderful. I also felt the special connection between the two of us, and we created something really amazing for the listeners and
I
viewers.
hope
And
so.
I'm just so happy to connect with you, and let's keep that connection going. And wishing you
Yes,
all the best, Julia.
and you, Jesse. An absolute delight to meet you. And yes, it would love you to keep it going. And enjoy your baby and your wife. And I hope when you come, you'll bring them with you so I can meet them too.
Will do. Take care, Julia. Thank you.
And you.